Good morning, Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Happy Tuesday to everybody. I have the joy of the Lord this morning, and if you don't have it, there's something wrong with you, because I've got it. It ain't me, it's you. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord. I've changed keys 3 times. Is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. Are you ready? If you want joy, you can clap for it. Shout. If you want joy, you can shout for it. If you want joy, you can jump for it. The joy of the... Are you ready? I'm going to give you some joy right here. And if the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. Do y'all remember that? Children's church? Was that when we were a white church? If the devil doesn't like it, he can sit on attack. What in the world were we singing? I will tell you this, our theology and our children's curriculum has gotten much better over the years. So we love you guys. We hope you're having a good day. We're glad you're connecting with us this morning at Connection. And I know we have a special word that's going to come to us today. We empty our minds, our hearts. We empty our any kind of preconditioning. We give space for the Holy Spirit to do His and her work today. For it's in the name and nature of Christ we pray. They all would say amen. Amen.
Amen. Sorry. Amen. Okay, so I'm going to continue the joy of the Lord a little bit. I don't think I can begin this morning and talk about what I want to talk about because I have some bitterness in my heart that I need to get off my chest. So, and the bitterness in my heart is towards somebody I don't even know. And it is whoever the person is who decided to take out a sponsored ad on Instagram during quarantine about a little gadget they have invented that if the waistband of your pants is too big, now, who all is having that problem during quarantine, okay? Except my brother, I hate him too, and Brandy, who cannot seem to stop losing weight. But for the rest of us normal people, who in the world wants to see an ad on Instagram about a little gadget that'll help you? You can clip it on your pants and make your waistband smaller in case it's too big. I have bitterness in my heart against that person, so I need to ask God for forgiveness for my hatred and bitterness before we get started so that I can have a clean and pure heart. Okay. A bedazzler? See, I could use the bedazzler. Not the gadget that makes my waistband smaller, but the bedazzler I could definitely use to draw the tension away. Okay. So let's have our morning blessing this morning. Spirit of truth, we come to you today to declare these intentions that we as a corporate body are focusing on this year. We have joyful, energetic bodies. We have loving, compassionate hearts. We have restful, alert minds, and we experience lightness of being in all things, even in our waistbands. It is our intention today and for the rest of this year to replace any resistance, disorder, effort, or struggle with gentleness, clarity, health, eagerness, love, joy, and freedom as our natural state. It is our prayer, our intention, and our heart's desire to be fully awake today and always. We believe it, we perceive it, and now we receive it in the name and nature of the Christ. Amen, and so it is. And I don't know if Benny flipped that back over to me in time for you to see me get my little sip of water, but you love me anyway. Okay, we're going to begin with our quotes today. Number 1, our fates, F-A-T-E-S, are in our own hands. We make and remake our own selves. We are the captains of our own souls. Nature pants with a desire to make us what we wish to be. The wish is the reality, what we think that we are. Benjamin Cardoza. Next, think for yourself. Trust your own intuition, for another isn't walking your journey. You are. Next, don't compare your life to others. There's no comparison between the sun and the moon. Each shines in their own time. Now, here's one by Friedrich, which, by the way, it's Friedrich Nietzsche that it was. What did you learn this week at Emory? It's Nietzsche? Okay. Friedrich Nietzsche, as my brother preached about a few weeks ago, also says, all things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. That's interesting. So that's very similar to the concept that the side who wins gets to write the history of what happened, and sometimes they rewrite history. Okay, most misunderstandings in the world could be avoided if people would simply take the time to ask, what else could this mean? That's good. Shannon Alder. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Arthur Schopenhauer, another famous philosopher, said that. And lastly, beauty is not a quality in things themselves. It exists merely in the mind, which contemplates the things, and then each mind perceives a different beauty. I love that one, David Hume. Okay, last week we talked about remembering who we are, and part of that teaching was that when we label ourselves, or the more labels we put on ourselves and use to identify ourselves, the smaller we become, number one, because each label just makes that box around us a little tighter. So the first thing these labels do is to make us smaller, okay? They make us contract rather than be bigger and expand. The second thing labeling does is it separates us from others, because the more specific we are about who we are and who we are not, as well as who others are and who they are not in our minds, the more we highlight our differences instead of emphasizing the areas in which we are alike. In other words, let's look at it or think of it as a checklist. If you're going to connect with another person, either romantically or just as a friend or a business partner, any situation that you're looking to connect with someone, and the more boxes you have that are your requirements of them before you will even allow a connection, then the more you're narrowing down your potential field. If you've only got 2 or 3 or even 10 boxes, then your potential field of people is going to be, maybe hundreds of thousands of people. But the higher the amount of those boxes, okay, the more number, if you've got 75 or 100 boxes that have to be checked before you'll even consider a connection with them, then that number of your potential field of connections decreases significantly. So you get the general direction that I'm going. The more labels we put on ourselves and others, the more we become divided and separated, and the more we limit our possibilities for connection. Okay, the third thing labels do, along with making you smaller rather than larger, and then secondly, separating you from others, it also separates you, labels also separate you from your authentic, infinite, eternal self, and the oneness and the unity that you come from, that eternal realm where we were all created, which is nothing but pure oneness with no separation. And we made the connection last week between us forgetting who we are as we were created, whole, eternal, infinite, and one with spirit, with all that is. We connected that, us forgetting that, to where we are now, which is in a state of disunity, largely, and in great separation from each other. There are huge divides at the moment between people. Many of us feel very polarized, and we're having trouble accepting people that we accept as being on the other side of things than we are. There's also an expectation that we choose a side. It's becoming increasingly difficult to find and to maintain the middle way. We are in a time of extremes. And so we talked last week about this being due in part to our tendency to label, and that it has even risen to a level of being a religion. Remember, I read to you a piece by a man named David Icke where he said that the greatest religion today is that of I am a, and whatever label you want to fill in the blank after that. And this religion of labeling has led us to a place of separation from each other. So today is going to be a continuation of sorts of that idea, but we're going to widen it out a little. Another way we could describe a label is to say the lens that we look through. It's different. A lens is different than a label, but only slightly, because the lenses we look through can also determine the degree to which we either see oneness or separation. Eventually, we're going to arrive at our conclusion today, which will be about attachment and how our attachment to things like these labels and these lenses causes us to either see reality as it is, or better still, how it could be if we choose to create it, or it causes us to see a distorted version of reality. Our lens is what determines that. And we're going to take a little bit of a winding path to get there, but I hope it will be as interesting to you as it was for me as I was putting it together. I was inspired to talk about this by a documentary I watched about early Christian art. The art that was created by the Christians in the period of history known as the Dark Ages. Last week I had song lyrics and science for you. Today I'm going to have a little bit of art and a little bit of history. So the period of history known as the Dark Ages began in the 4th century, so we're talking about 300 years after Jesus was crucified, and when the Roman Empire was starting to crumble, and then it ended in the 11th century, specifically the year 1066, when William the Conqueror invaded England. Now, that date begins what we call the Middle Ages, or the medieval period, but before that were these 800 years between the fall of Rome and the beginning of the medieval period, which this documentary I was watching about the art and architecture that was produced during those 800 years, it claims that these were not dark times at all. The narrator describes it like this. He says, "In this shadowy slab of time, everything changed. The greatest empire the world had seen up until that point," and he was speaking of the Roman Empire, "melted back into the cultural shadows, and various powerful artistic forces stepped up to take its place. Art never lies. And the story that art tells us about these exciting times is that this was never an age of darkness, but rather an age of light." So what he's saying here also fits in with another theme and thread we've been following lately about contradictions. Life, the world, people, the Bible are full of contradictions. And he's saying this time that we now know as the Dark Ages was actually full of light, according to its art. Again, it just depends on what lens you are choosing to view it through. So this concept is also very close to what we've talked about many times, that seen through one lens, the void is a place of darkness and may even be frightening. But seen through another lens, that void is just a protected womb of creation. So the first subject this documentary addresses is a structure in Jerusalem called the Dome of the Rock that sits on one of the holiest physical sites on earth. It's full of what is known as sacred geometry. Everything about the way it was built contains religious symbolism in its very precise and carefully calculated measurements. It's located at a place called the Temple Mount, and which is considered the holiest spot in all of Jerusalem. It's where King Solomon built the very first Jewish temple, which was later destroyed by King Nebuchadnezzar. And then King Herod came back after that and built another Jewish temple on top of the same piece of ground. Then finally, in 638 AD, the Muslims conquered Jerusalem and built this structure called the Dome of the Rock on top of layers and layers of religious history. So all of the buildings erected on this sacred site throughout history were built there because it is the location of this one rock in particular. But depending on which lens you're looking through, this rock represents different things to you. The Jews believe that this is the rock on which Abraham prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac. Also, they believe that the famous Ark of the Covenant is thought to lie hidden somewhere beneath it. But Islam has a different story. They believe that this is the holy rock from which the prophet Muhammad set off on his great night journey to heaven after the angel Gabriel came to visit him in Mecca and led him to this rock in Jerusalem. From there, he ascended to heaven where he met God, who instructed him on the Muslim duty of prayer. And anybody that knows anything about Islam, that praying 5 times a day is kind of the bedrock of their religion. So this holy rock, like the architecture around it, is a point of contact between man and God. And that is the message of the whole building. But you see, it's a different message depending on which lens you're looking through. It's holy to Jews because of its connection to Abraham and to the Ark of the Covenant. It's holy to Muslims because of its connection with Muhammad. And a third layer of the religious meaning is that it's a holy site to Christians because they believe it to be the place where Jesus was presented in the temple when he was 12 years old, and then later where he prayed and taught. So a further description of this Dome of the Rock says, from floor to ceiling, it's covered in the most exquisite mosaics, gold and green tiles. And in the documentary, I was able to see, and it's gorgeous. If you haven't ever had a chance to look at pictures of it, it's worth going to see it. Golden green tiles with beautiful jeweled crowns, and all of the pieces of the mosaics are set at different angles so that they reflect the light differently at different times of the day, all intended to evoke a vision of paradise. I thought the way that it was worded there was so significant that the different mosaics that cover the walls are at different angles purposely so that they will catch or reflect the light differently at different times of the day. But all are intended to evoke the same vision, that of paradise. So what is paradise? It's a place where no matter what lens you're looking through, it's still beautiful. No matter what time of the day or where the light happens to be hitting or coming from, it's always beautiful. On the symbolic level, whether you're looking through the Jewish lens or the Muslim lens or the Christian lens, it's still paradise. So that's beautiful. That's a beautiful concept. Unless people start getting too attached to their lens and don't want to allow any of the other lenses in the building, which has happened over the years at this site. There have been times in history where all 3 of the religions have coexisted peacefully in the Dome of the Rock, and then there have been times when there have been wars fought over who's going to control that site. And we'll talk more about the coexistence of different faiths during the Dark Ages a little later. But right now, I want to focus just on the Christians for a bit and give you a few more examples of how the different lenses we look through affect everything in our lives. This documentary also talked about how the first Christian churches were just rooms inside people's homes where small groups of Christians gathered because Christianity was actually illegal in the Roman Empire until 313 AD when the Roman Emperor Constantine became a Christian, and he not only legalized it, but then he made it the official religion of the Roman Empire. So all of a sudden, after 300 years, the Christians realized they were free to build buildings. My mother would have loved it. And they were free to worship openly in public instead of hiding in their homes. So they took as their model for the first Christian churches these things called Roman basilicas that were originally built for civil gatherings. They were rectangular, and people actually entered from the sides. But when the church took over the construction of this shape, it swiveled it around, and it put only one door at the back. Okay? We're going to get to the symbolism of that later. So the way this changed the vibe, as it were, was instead of there being many doors to come through, everybody had to come through one door at the very back. There was no focal point in the center anymore. Everything, once you walked in, pointed you straight toward the end where the priest sat up on an elevated stage, so they were literally higher than the people. So immediately there was this suggestion in the first Christian churches of hierarchy, okay, of we're better than you, we are higher than you, and that you can only come through one door, there's no coming in the side, you got to all come in the same way. So do you see how the lens of the theology that was prevalent at the time even showed itself in the very architecture? The culture of the entire Roman Empire had shifted from polytheism, a belief in and worship of many gods, to the people being and the people being able to come in from all sides and meet in the center, to this idea of monotheism where there's only one door and you kind of have to work your way up to the front. The people in the back were less important than the people up front, and the people up front were raised higher. So that was the lens humanity was looking through at that time, and so it was reflected in everything around them. Now, interestingly, the documentary then talked about how the Roman mausoleums, which is where the places where rich Roman people buried their dead, they were round, whereas the basilicas were rectangular, the mausoleums were round, usually with the coffin or what they called the sarcophagus in the middle. And so the symbolism here is that death is the great equalizer. In mausoleums, there was no higher, no lower, no front, no back. When the people met there for their funeral services or to mourn their dead or just to contemplate, which they did often, they always found themselves face to face with whoever else was there because it was in a circle. Whereas in the basilica, in the churches, they always were just looking at the back of somebody's head. So this became a different lens that the Roman people, the Roman Christians, the first Roman Christians were able to look through. And some of them preferred it so much that these little chapels built in the style of the mausoleums in circular buildings began to spring up. And some groups of people decided to start holding their services there or to individually pray and meditate. And it's to the church's credit, the larger church, that over the years, as this practice became more and more popular, some of the Christian churches, not all of them, but some of them actually changed their architecture to combine both of those shapes. That they had the rectangular part, but then at the front they kind of lowered the altar space down and made it circular so that it was a combination of both of the shapes. The last piece of this documentary I want to share with you is about the lens through which Christians of different eras viewed Jesus. We tend to think that our modern view of him and the way we look at and think of him now is the only way he was ever looked at. And we take for granted that our version and our view of Jesus, whatever that may be, is the correct one. But there are many different lenses people view Jesus through, and just like those mosaics in the Dome of the Rock, at different times in history, there have been some lenses that were more predominant than others. We talked a few weeks ago about the 7 stages of God that Deepak Chopra outlined in his book, and talked about how at different times in our lives, we need to connect with a different aspect of God. Sometimes we need God the healer. Sometimes we need God the provider. Sometimes we need God the Father. And sometimes we need God the Mother, which the next part I'm going to talk about actually covers. God doesn't change. God is not the one doing the changing. God is all of these things all of the time. It's us, it's humanity, and our ability and our capacity to see and comprehend either more or less of him, that is what is changing. And that is determined by what lens we choose to look through. Listen to this next short piece that discusses how Jesus was represented artistically during different times in history and seen through different lenses according to what humanity was in need of at the time. Also, listen to how Christian artists obviously borrowed images from other religions, including paganism, and that will lead us straight into our discussion of attachment. So many modern Christians today are looking through such a small and limited lens because they don't know the true history of Christianity. They have no idea that many of our customs and traditions and holidays, and even as we'll talk about now, our artistic images, they came from other sources. And that is what has shaped our view of Jesus. And so many Christians today have become emotionally attached in an unhealthy way to their specific lens, not even realizing the origin of that lens. That unhealthy attachment has created nothing but separation and division. So here's what the documentary says. What you never see in the very first examples of Christian art is a Jesus who is suffering, in pain, covered in blood after being tortured. That Jesus doesn't turn up in art for over 1,000 years or so after his death, because the tortured Jesus is a creation of the Middle Ages, an expression of medieval guilt and terror. What horrible pain the artistic mind of the Middle Ages went on to inflict on the crucified Jesus in the centuries ahead. How harshly it whipped him and scourged him and punctured him. In the beginning, though, artists didn't do that. The first depictions of Jesus in art are young and handsome, curly-haired and free. The early Christians weren't looking for a God who made them feel guilty. That idea would never have caught on. They were looking for a God who would save them and fill them with hope. So as their model for the first physical artistic representations of Jesus, Christian artists selected the youngest and handsomest of the pagan gods, Apollo, the god of the sun, blonde and unbearded, youthful and happy. Now, time out. How many modern day Christians would lose their minds if they knew that the first artistic representations of Jesus were based on the Roman pagan god Apollo? Jesus of Nazareth, a Middle Eastern Jew, was not a blonde-haired man with Aryan features. That was Apollo. But that's the lens that was used then at the time, because nobody that was doing the art then knew what Jesus looked like, and it stuck. And so people now refuse to let go of that image, and they will argue with you that you're wrong if you have a different image of God, even if you're right, or if you're closer to the truth than they are. Pagan gods, the documentary goes on to say, could be male and female. They amalgamated the sexes and represented both genders at once. And the first artistic representations of Jesus were very similarly androgynous. There is neither male nor female, wrote St. Paul to the Galatians. You are all one in Jesus. The initial Christians sought to demonstrate that in their art. As pagans, people had had lots of goddesses and female deities to worship, Isis, Diana, etc. But Christianity had none. And so the people began to miss the qualities female deities had brought to their worship experience. The entire feminine side was absent from early Christianity. So the feminization of Jesus was a deliberate artistic attempt to fill this void. Christianity needed to find a feminine, nurturing, mothering presence. It's important to remember that during the early centuries of Christianity, Christians and pagans lived together in reasonable harmony. So it should be no surprise that Christians borrowed from pagan art, because that's what art does. It borrows from and builds on what's already there. The earliest known Christian church has been found in a Syrian border town right next door to a Jewish synagogue and around the corner from a temple dedicated to the bull god Mithras. All these different religions swapped each other's converts, borrowed each other's gods, and influenced each other's arts. Modern day Christians do not want to hear that. They don't want any of that. So when the early Christians went in search of a feminine figure, they turned to Egyptian earth mother Isis, one of the most revered of all the pagan goddesses. She was the goddess of fertility, the mother from whom all life sprang. If you wanted to have a baby, you prayed to Isis. When you wanted your crops to grow, multiply, and be fruitful, you prayed to Isis, whoever you were, from slave all the way to nobility. To emphasize her caring nature and maternal qualities, Isis was often shown with a baby on her knee. The baby is her son, Horus. Horus was the god of the sky, and he has a very similar backstory as that of Jesus. His birthday also falls on the winter solstice on or around December 25th. When Christianity, including Christian art, grew hungry for its own distinct female icon, Isis, the mother of Horus, was an obvious model for which Christians simply substituted Mary, the mother of Jesus. Think of how many images in Christian art depict Mary with an infant Jesus in her arms or a toddler Jesus on her lap or playing at her feet. All of this Christian imagery or iconography began with Isis and Horus. They were simply transformed and inserted into the Christian pantheon. Mother Mary, caring for the baby Jesus, also known as the Madonna and Child, became one of the most popular images of the Dark Ages. Now, this is the interesting part. The emergence of Mary, the mother of Jesus, in Christian art had an important byproduct. It eliminated the need to feminize or soften Jesus. His image was free to now be fully masculine. Now, I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but you can see it in the art that after that time, the pictures of Jesus started to become more masculine. And this is not my opinion. This is something art historians have studied for years and years. It is a fact. Okay, so just that little bit of history sheds a whole new light on so many ideals that Christians hold as sacred. And the point is, that's fine. The fact that the statues and paintings of Jesus were at first based on Apollo because none of the artists knew what he looked like doesn't make those statues or paintings any less sacred or any less beautiful. But it also isn't the only image of Jesus that is sacred or that can be sacred and beautiful. And we don't have to throw all of our Madonna and Child paintings away because they were based on Isis and Horus. It doesn't make them less meaningful or, again, any less holy. They both actually represent the same concept. It's just being looked at through a different lens. Again, the only problem when we become attached to our lens and refuse to accept any other lens is valid. That's the original point of all the separation and division that now exists in our world. As I said last week, this is where we are now, where as a result of us forgetting who we are, or as we've talked about today, us not knowing our history and where we've come from, both originally from that eternal realm of unity, and as well as our history here on earth, we're not aware that the things we currently believe and hold sacred, we're not aware of where they actually came from. We have developed an attachment to our labels and to our lenses that is unhealthy and unproductive, which is why we as a collective now find ourselves in this place where the pain of remaining the same is growing bigger than the pain of change. So, what can we do about it? Let's close today by talking about attachment and how we can shift it from being unhealthy to something that's helpful. Don Miguel Ruiz Sr. wrote a book that I've actually done a teaching on here at Connection. It's a book called The 4 Agreements. Some of you may remember it. I'm going to go over them quickly. The 4 agreements are simply this: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, don't make assumptions, and always do your best. It's a great book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Don Miguel Ruiz's son, Don Miguel Ruiz Jr., has now written a book called The 5 Levels of Attachment that kind of takes this to a higher level, which I'm going to summarize for you now because, as I've said, I believe at the bottom of all of this turmoil and distress and separation consciousness we're experiencing now is our issue with attachment. We are all too attached to our own point of view, and the information in this book helps explain these stages or levels of attachment, the last of which is the level we should all be striving to reach. So I'll read now from Don Miguel Ruiz Jr.'s book, The 5 Levels of Attachment. He says, as a child, attachment to possessions or ideas and opinions is an important, healthy stage in human development. This is characterized by the "this is mine and no one else can have it" phase all young children go through. A problem arises when a person never outgrows this stage and carries that level of attachment with them into adulthood. Anything you are attached to has the potential to control you and your behavior depending on your level of attachment. Your level of attachment to your beliefs and opinions affects your perception, shapes your likes and dislikes, influences your actions, as well as the way you present yourself to others. Operating by a set of principles or having a life philosophy is crucial to navigating reality, but you should never become a prisoner to these precepts. Your beliefs and opinions should only exist to serve you, not the other way around. Your authentic self must always remain your center. Over-attachment to things instills fear of loss. Extreme attachment to success instills fear of failure. Clinging too aggressively to relationships creates the fear of losing them. Clinging too tightly to a particular ideology results in fear of change. If you develop too firm an attachment to anything, the fear of losing it will follow, creating only resistance and anxiety. Just as you are not your car or your house or your job title or your bank account, you are also not your race, your gender, your religion, or even your thoughts. All of these are external things that may or may not add value to your life, but must always be viewed as separate from your intrinsic value and identity as a human being. Even a relationship with another, no matter how intimate, is something you participate in, not something you are. Attachment leads you to blindly believe you are less of a person without whatever it is you're attached to. Now he begins to talk about the 5 levels, and he goes in backwards order. He goes from 5 down to 1. Okay, so see if you recognize yourself in any of these levels of attachment. There's some overlap, but there's a very distinct difference between level 5 and level 1. Level 5 is fanaticism. This level of attachment represents the peak or height of your association with your inclinations. At this level, you worship your attachments. You attack, degrade, or ridicule all those who do not adhere to your convictions. You cut off relationships with people you find hold dissimilar interests or beliefs from you. At this level, parents disown children and or kick them out of their house. At level 5 attachment, you see everything in your life through a particular filter or lens. You are able to see only those who your filter allows you to see. All others are no longer even allowed to be part of your reality. It is as if they are invisible to you. Okay, we could stop here and talk for a minute about what's going on right now, a big topic of discussion, this thing called cancel culture. That if somebody doesn't believe in your very narrow, strict way of believing, you just cancel them out of, they disappear as far as you're concerned. And so then he goes on to explain that it doesn't just apply to people. He says, if a book offers a different viewpoint than your belief, you immediately stop reading. You see any opposing idea to those you hold as utter nonsense. Further, you sometimes use force and violence to emphasize or defend your opinions. At this level of extreme attachment, your authentic self no longer exists. Your beliefs and preferences are now controlling you completely. You have turned into nothing more than a machine unable to act or think past the programs that have been installed and are running your consciousness and behavior. There is no longer any separation between you and your attachments. Whenever you believe something without question, you are at risk for attachment at this most extreme level. Wow. So I think a lot more people are actually on this level than we would like to believe today. Level 4, internalization. At this level, your attachment is firmly at the core of your persona, so that detaching would literally feel like ripping a part of your soul out. For example, if you're attached to being a vegan, no shade on vegans, this is just the example he uses, you would beat yourself up harshly for slipping up even once and eating meat. If you see a steak and even feel the desire to taste it, you believe you are a bad person and that the desire alone reflects badly on you. At this level, your attachments turn into anchors for self-judgment. Back to our vegan example, you might choose your friends on the basis of whether or not they too are vegan. You feel pity for meat eaters and actively try to persuade them to become vegan. You buy into the delusion that your truth is the only truth and your way of life is superior not only for you, but for everyone else too. You are dogmatic about your beliefs and scornful of the beliefs of others. So that's level 4, internalization. Level 3, identity. At this level, you no longer recognize the process that you are becoming attached to something. You are pretty much living completely subconsciously and are unaware of your thought patterns. At this level, you wear your attachment like a mask. You can still put it on and take it off, but when you are wearing it, you delude yourself into thinking you are the mask. In other words, while you are in the attachment, you forget that it's just a mask. This mask can be anything: your race, nationality, opinions, beliefs, political party affiliations, or material possessions. You now see those things as vital parts of your identity. And you don't see yourself as a valuable human being when you are not wearing the mask of these attachments. At this level, you deliberately instigate and participate in arguments defending your attachments. For instance, if you are attached to a particular sports team, you see fans of any other sports team as the enemy. Okay, but that's a shallow example. But it's this need, at this level, is this need to have enemies. As a capitalist, you scorn communism. You now perceive your preferences as objectively superior. All right, so that's level 3. Level 2, preference. At this level, you consider yourself detached from your inclinations enough to know they are merely your preferences. You can easily detach yourself from them and are aware that this process is happening. You are in total control of your beliefs and opinions. Although you have cherished convictions, you still see the value in opposing ideas, and more importantly, you value the people who hold opposing opinions. Those you consider your peers are not only people who adhere to the same ideology as you, but also who hold different views, and you see their views as coloring your experience of the world, as you are often able to see through their lens and appreciate their point of view. So I think this is pretty much the level most of us should be shooting for, because when I go on to level 1, you're going to see, I don't think many of us, if at all, are ever going to reach this level 1 he talks about, which is Jesus level stuff. Level 1 is the authentic self. Level 1 is that level of complete non-attachment. You don't cling to anything. You welcome any event and let it pass through you like the fleeting occurrence it is. Whatever happens, you are not affected by it. You are ready to experience any situation with no yearning for it to extend in duration if it's pleasant, or be shortened if it is unpleasant. In other words, this is the ultimate definition of roll with the changes, where you don't wish the good times would be longer or that something unpleasant would end sooner. I'm always going to be at that level where I wish the good things would last longer and I don't want the bad things to last very long. At this level, though, what he's saying is you are able to see your preferences and possessions as totally separate from your being. Now, this part's good. You realize that intense feelings are merely chemicals running through your body and are impermanent. You welcome any and all emotions with open arms. Feel it, then let it go, and allow the next one to take its place. Being on the level of the authentic self is a state of being similar to being in meditation, contemplating your thoughts as they pass by without holding on to them. Your mind is as pure as a newborn's, holding on to no ideology or preference whatsoever. Okay, so again, like I said, I'm not sure that that's even possible, not to ever have any preferences at all about anything, but he's saying it to make it the exact polar opposite from this level 5 that he talks about earlier. Okay, he goes on, as it concerns spirituality, at level 5, which remember is extreme fanaticism, God just happens to be the focus of devotion that your chosen religion is centered on. But the religion itself and your attachment to it is more important to you than God. We see a lot of that today. At level 1, however, you can go into any church, any synagogue, any temple, mosque, or even a drum circle, and you will be able to find and to feel the love and grace of God. Now, this is the good stuff. Here's the wrap up. The point is not to give up all attachment altogether. The point is to become consciously aware of your attachments and to distance yourself from any form of dogmatism as much as you can and at every opportunity possible. Learn to use your beliefs, opinions, and preferences as vehicles to navigate through life rather than allowing them to become filters that distort reality. Lastly, realize that everyone's experience is unique. And I would add, for our purposes today, everyone's lens is different. So I know it might seem like I've been beating a dead horse for these last few months, harping on these themes of not judging others, of giving others space, of holding space for others, letting people be who they are, unconditionally loving others. But it's because that's the key. That's the whole ball of wax right now. That is the lesson our generation, our time needs to learn. That's the medicine. And I'm going to keep saying it in different ways until Spirit tells me otherwise. So the very last thing I want to read to you today is a short little piece that I actually read to you on my very first Facebook Live. I looked it up this week for some reason. It was back at the beginning of the year in 2019. And so I reposted it and I listened to it again. And this message is just a short piece by a woman named Kellyanne Maddox, but it is still so very true. And it's what I want to leave with you this week. And interestingly enough, the title of it is Deity Through the Lens of Consciousness. She says, all of our experiences count with regard to our personal relationship with God, as long as we're not dogmatic, stating opinions strongly as if they were fact about, and as long as we are not dogmatic, what she says, stating these opinions as if they're fact about each other's experiences, and as long as we don't expect others to conform to the way that we feel and the way that we believe. When you find yourself wanting to argue with someone about the way you experience God versus the way that they do, just walk away, because it's never going to end well. Okay? Learn to redirect that energy that you want to use in argument with someone towards something more positive. Anytime you find yourself wanting to defend your personal experience with God or a particular spiritual practice that resonates with you, stop and realize that that is dogma at work. And dogma always reigns on everyone's parade. Remember, a spiritual experience is largely about, and should largely be about, the experience itself and what you get from it personally, not how you try to explain it to someone else after the fact. An old Norse proverb says, what you and you alone know is always the most profound and potent knowledge. So what she's saying here is, learn not to waste your energy trying to convince someone that your path is the best path. trying to get someone else to see the world through your lens, I promise you that argument on Facebook is time you're never going to get back in your life. And don't try to tell people that if they'll just do it exactly the way you do it, then they'll experience exactly what you experience, because that's not the case. No two people ever experience anything the same way. Maybe they experience it very similarly, but not exactly the same way. But it's very tempting when you've had a wonderful experience, it's very tempting to try to share it with others because you want them to feel what you felt, and that's fine. But don't expect them to, number one, be as excited about it as you are. Don't get disappointed if they don't feel the same level of excitement. Or worse, don't get angry or upset when they're not. Just let the experience be what it is to you and let them have their own experience. And most importantly, learn to appreciate every lens.
Well, my lens has changed over the years. I was raised as a child. LaDonna and I would believe that if we came home from school and our parents weren't there, or we couldn't get in touch with Deity Bridges, who was the secretary of the church, or our Aunt Joan, that Jesus came, we got left. Come on now. And our next door neighbors were Catholic, and they were good people. But as Pentecostal holiness, we knew they drank wine, and they didn't believe in the second work of sanctification, meaning they didn't Ibo Boshanda like us. And so they weren't really saved. They were going to have to go through the tribulation. And so, we just decided, LaDonna, if we sin as, 8 years old and 16 in our big sinning stages, if we had committed a sin and we got left behind, we were just going to move in with the Catholic neighbors, because they weren't going to heaven, so we could just go eat their food and live in their basement or something. And so then, my uncle has a revelation that, the rapture is not on its way. We're not sent into this world to leave the world. We're sent here to be a kingdom influence, salt and light, to be involved, to subdue the earth, to help make the kingdoms of this world the kingdoms of our God. And so the lens began to change. We were Pentecostals who believed at one time that the Catholics and Episcopals who wore the clerical collar, they had the collar on backwards because their theology was backwards. And then we got a revelation, we're all going to wear clerical collars. How about that? We're going to all be wearing the thing we've been making fun of our whole lives. Your lens changes over time. Whether it's ordaining of women and us being in a predominantly holiness background that didn't believe women should be ordained, they've got to cover their head when they preach. They've got to not wear pants. They've got to ask their husband if they have a theological question about the Bible. That was what we were raised in. All of a sudden we're ordained, and women are prophesying, women are preaching from the pulpit, and every step along the way, watch this, our lens has changed. And so whatever lens we have right now, we can't look at people that God sends into our path and say, your lens is wrong. Because think about just in our journey, how much our lens has changed. And guess what? As long as we're alive, it's going to keep changing. And so we have to give others the space that we want. Our lens is going to change. Give them the space to allow their lens to change. That's how we engage in respectful, what Islam calls jidal. I'm learning some new words. Jidal al-Hassan. That's in the Quran for respectful dialogue, learning to have empathetic understanding of that everybody comes from their own perspective. That's why Jesus looked at Peter, James, and John and said, guys, please stop with this. Everybody's going to kill the Hellenist. They're sheep of other pastures. And guess what? They're all connected to me. And so we all have a different lens, and that's okay. God's big enough to handle all of it. Amen, somebody? I wanted to say what a wonderful word today, and give some shouts out to everybody that connected with us. I think Benny was sending me this. He was all nervous that he was not going to do it right, and I think I've got all the names here, except maybe we missed just a few. Miss Bobby, Mary, Pastor Don, Elaine, Susan, Josephine, Terry, Miss Justina, Lenora, Callie, Olivia, Terry, Doreen, Roberta, Richard, Laverne, Julie, Fred, James Card, Miss Rochelle, yay! I haven't seen that name in a while. And my Aunt Darlene Swilly, love you, Aunt Darlene. There's some others, but it was having difficulty accessing them. So if we didn't call your name, please be patient with us. You know that we love you. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. We continue our journey in the power of now, learning to see, step outside of ourselves and see that we are not our thoughts. We're the observer that's able to say we're higher than all these things. And so we look forward to seeing you tomorrow night. And then again on Sunday morning, go in peace. May God bless you.